Chapter 6. That Monday, Ethan and Olivia returned home after dropping the kids off at school to find a long white limousine with dark tinted windows parked in front of their house. When they walked inside, they were startled to see a small woman and a large man sitting in their living room. The large man had proportionally large hands and rings on every finger of his right hand, which held a brown leather briefcase. The woman was tight-lipped and had long red fingernails. She wore a ring as well, which bore a letter P made up of wavy blue lines. Ethan thought the wavy letter P looked very familiar. Does anyone know who these characters are, by the way?
No.
Okay, you will soon. With his non-ringed hand, the large man was petting Pinky's head, which at that time was still very scruffy, as most dogs' heads are. She enjoyed having her head rubbed nearly as much as she enjoyed drinking from the toilet. And so she sat there wagging her tail happily. Pinky was not much of a watchdog in those days. "What are you doing in our house?" Ethan demanded. "Who are you?" "Relax, Mr. Cheeseman. We mean you no harm," said the small woman. "We're here to make you a very generous offer." "If you're talking about the LVR, it's not for sale," said Ethan. "Don't get excited here. We're not about to purchase some contraption that's half finished and that we have no idea how to operate. What we're offering, Mr. Cheeseman, is a job, a very high-paying job with considerable fringe benefits." "And who is we exactly?" "I work for a company called PlexiWave. Perhaps you've heard of it?" "I've heard of it," Olivia said. "You manufacture weapons, and we have no desire to have our inventions turned into something that might harm or kill people." "You forget, Mrs. Cheeseman, we're also the world's largest manufacturer of refrigerators and microwave ovens." Ethan now realized why the woman's ring looked so familiar. That same wavy letter P could be found on the microwave and the refrigerator in their own home. "Well, our contraption, as you say, will do nothing to keep food cold or heat up a frozen burrito," said Olivia. "Don't be so naive, Mrs. Cheeseman," sneered the woman. "All great inventions will eventually be used to make weapons. I imagine the club was first invented as a means of cracking a nut. It was inevitable that one day it would be used for cracking skulls. That's just the way of the world, I'm afraid." "Thank you, but we'll leave the business of skull cracking to people like you," said Olivia defiantly. "How does $2 million a year sound?" said the woman, ignoring what Olivia had just said. $2 million a year? Said Ethan. "To start, with the first year's salary paid in advance." The woman nodded to Mr. 29, who opened the briefcase, revealing stacks and stacks of U.S. currency totaling what certainly looked to be $2 million. "Plus, you'll be entitled to benefits too numerous to list," the woman continued. "For starters, you and your family will be put up in a beautiful estate on a tropical island where the schools are second to none and there's absolutely no crime." "The crime is people like you," Olivia shot back. "People like you devising new and innovative ways of hurting others and then selling the technology to the highest bidder. We will have no part of it, thank you." Olivia walked over to the door and opened it. "I will thank you to take your ill-gotten money, get back into your limo, and return to your factory of death. And furthermore, be advised that I fully intend to report you to the authorities." With that, the small, thin-lipped woman and the large man got up quietly and walked to the door. "Very well," the woman said. "But I guarantee you've not heard the last of us." The man and the woman walked out of the house, and Olivia slammed the door behind them and quickly locked it. "Well, that's it," Ethan said to Olivia. "I guess it's time for us to think about leaving." "Leaving?" asked Olivia. "What do you mean?" She looked out through the curtains and watched the man and the woman climb into the back of the limo as a driver in dark glasses held the door open for them. "I mean, we should pack up everything and move somewhere far away where nobody knows us. Someplace the children will be safe." "I am not about to let those thugs force us out of our home. What kind of message is that for the children? That every time a bully confronts us, we run away? Now, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to scramble the code to the LVR in case it falls into the wrong hands." Ethan watched as his wife hurried off to her study. Maybe she was right, he thought. After all, she usually was. Maybe he was overreacting. Then again, daring to defy high-ranking officials from powerful multinational conglomerates like Plexiwave could be dangerous. And as Ethan would soon find out, it would be dangerous. In fact, it would be deadly. Headquarters, said the thin-lipped woman into her tiny cell phone as the limo sped away from the house. Headquarters, go ahead, Ms. Four. Yes, said Ms. Four. I need to speak to Mr. One immediately. Right away, said the woman on the other end. See how the reaction was different when Ms. Four called versus when Mr. Five calls? How's it different? Go ahead.
When Mr. Five called, they didn't let him talk to 1, 2, or 3, but then when Ms. Four called,
Yeah,
just immediately let her talk to
Yeah, Mr. Five kind of got pushed around a little bit and ignored, and Ms. Four called, and they right away listened to her. Yes, quickly.
Is the Plexiwave part of the group that has Mr. Five in it?
Yes. Yes, that seems to be a connection between Plexiwave and the Black Coats. Ms. Four rode in silence as she waited a few moments until the deep, whispery voice of Mr. One came through the cell phone earpiece. Please tell me you were successful, Ms. Four, said Mr. One. Not at this time, I'm afraid. And why not? It's the woman, said Ms. Four. I believe Mr. Cheeseman could be persuaded eventually, but his wife seems quite opposed to the idea. Then we must do something about that, mustn't we? I understand, said Ms. Four. I understand completely. Several mornings later, Olivia awoke before the rest of the family and went downstairs to the kitchen where she made a pot of coffee as she did every morning. Actually, to say that she awoke before the rest of the family isn't entirely true, since to awaken you must first be asleep. Anxiety had been keeping Olivia up most nights since the encounter with the large man and the thin-lipped woman. As the coffee brewed, she walked to the front door to fetch the newspaper. It was still dark outside, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel safe opening the door to her own house. She decided she would read the paper later and sat down to drink her coffee without it. Not long after finishing her morning coffee, she began to feel ill. As she got the children up and ready for school, it got worse. She had a splitting headache and felt as though she might be running a fever, and so Olivia went off to see the doctor regarding her increasingly painful headache. She sat in the waiting room, shielding her eyes from the bright fluorescent lights, until her name was called, and she was told to wait for the doctor in the examining room. She waited for what seemed like a very long time, until suddenly the door swung open, and in walked a bald man with large reflective sunglasses and exceedingly shallow cheeks. His bare head glistened with sweat. Hello, Mrs. Cheeseman, he said. What seems to be troubling you today? You're not Dr. Spencer, she said. Well, there's nothing wrong with your vision, the man joked. Dr. Spencer has gone home sick. Even we physicians aren't immune to a little sickness now and again. With that, he chuckled and pulled a tiny flashlight from his pocket. I'm Dr. Fiverson, the man said, shining the small light into each of Olivia's eyes. Dr. Fiverson? It's Swedish. Your eyes are very dilated, and you seem to be running a fever. I have just the thing for you. The man, calling himself Dr. Fiverson, moved to the counter and began preparing a hypodermic needle. What is that? Olivia asked. Oh, something to help with your migraine. But I never told you I had a migraine. Yes. Well, before Dr. Spencer left for the day, he mentioned you have a history of migraines. And this is a new drug that works wonders on them. And because this man said he was a colleague of their trusted family doctor, Olivia was only slightly suspicious of him. But she should have been much more suspicious. Especially when the doctor raised his arm to inject her with whatever was in that hypodermic needle. Because when he did, his sleeve rode up, revealing a strange tattoo on his left wrist. A tattoo that read 3VAW 1X319. And if she had seen that tattoo reflected in his mirrored sunglasses, she surely would have run from the room and gone straight to the police. For when seen in the mirror, that strange tattoo read, Plexiwave. You kind of called that yesterday, didn't you? I think you had it upside down instead of backwards, but that's the right idea.
What is it again?
Yeah.
What is it again?
That tattoo that Mr. Five had on his wrist,
Yeah.
if you read it backwards, it says Plexi Wave, which is the company with the wavy blue lines. So lots of connections to bad guys there. Advice on choosing a doctor. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
How do you spell Plexi?
Plexiwave. Plexi Wave. Advice on choosing a doctor. There comes a time in everyone's life, being born for instance, when he or she will require the help of a qualified physician. When that time does arrive, you'll want to make sure you end up with a good one, because, for one thing, doctors aren't cheap. Gone are the days when the old country doctor would drive out to your house and amputate your infected leg in exchange for a basket of goose eggs and a rhubarb pie. Nowadays, such a procedure would cost you quite a bit more. By the time you managed to bake enough rhubarb pies, your leg probably would have fallen off anyway. At today's prices, you can't afford to entrust your health and well-being to anyone but the best doctors available. I have therefore put together a short list of warning signs to indicate that perhaps you have selected a bad doctor. He listens to your heart by holding a drinking glass to your chest. The skeleton in his office only has one arm. The aquarium in the waiting room contains 2 or more dead fish. That's not a good sign. He advises you to drink plenty of solids. Oh, that would be a bad doctor. Yeah. He has a sweaty bald head and a tattoo on his left wrist that, when seen in a mirror, forms the name of an evil international weapons conglomerate. I would say that would qualify as a bad sign. Yeah. Chapter 7. Olivia returned from the clinic feeling worse than she had before she went in. She told her husband about the substitute doctor with the strange tattoo who had given her the injection. Mr. Cheeseman was immediately suspicious, and when Olivia drifted off to sleep, he called the police, who launched a full investigation but were never able to find the man who called himself Dr. Fiverson, or even anyone who had heard of him. When Ethan went in to see the officer assigned to the case, a tall, tired-looking man with a calico mustache, the man assured him that they were doing everything they could to locate the suspect. The man was friendly and offered Mr. Cheeseman a cup of coffee, which he served to him in a white mug adorned with a letter P made up of wavy blue lines. This is precisely when Ethan realized he was on his own. Over the next couple of months, various specialists prescribed various medications, but Olivia's condition failed to improve. At one point, she became bedridden. She passed the time by knitting things for her children, when she could muster up the strength. In addition to being a fabulous cook, a wonderful mother, and a brilliant scientist, Olivia could knit just about anything. Give her enough yarn, and it's quite possible she could knit a go-kart or a grand piano. But she was too weak for such enormous projects, and so she kept it simple. For Joe, she knit a stocking cap. For Maggie, a lovely scarf. And for little Gerard, a sock puppet, which he immediately named Steve, placed on his left hand, and vowed never to remove. In time, Olivia's energy diminished to the point that even holding her knitting needles was too difficult, and the many medications that she was taking turned something as simple as knitting into a frustrating and confusing endeavor. Powerless to help her, Ethan could only sit and watch as his beautiful wife, the love of his life, slowly slipped into unconsciousness, never to waken again. Advice on being a good mother. Knit stocking caps, scarves, and sock puppets named Steve. That would be a very sad place to stop if we stopped. But we have another chapter today. Thank goodness. Chapter 8. Until Mr. Cheeseman is able to complete work on the LVR, the only way to travel through time is with a handy literary device known as the flashback. Or in this case, the flash forward. For here we are now, 2 years later, after the death of the lovely Olivia. 2 years since Ethan and his children first went underground, and they are still on the run from people like Mr. 5, Ms. 4, international super spy Pavel Dushenko, and a top-secret government agency. More important, the LVR, the only means of ever seeing their mother alive again, is still not working. "What do you think the problem is?" asked Joe, as the station wagon made its way down the rural highway and Gerard periodically stuck his head out of the window and mooed at herds of unsuspecting cows. "The problem, scientifically speaking, is the code," said Mr. Cheeseman. "Wisely, your mother encrypted it to keep it safe. She wrote it on a piece of paper, and recently I've been able to decipher it. The problem is, it's only half there." With that, Mr. Cheeseman removed a mint green piece of paper from his breast pocket and handed it to Joe, whose forehead immediately wrinkled. The paper had obviously been torn down the middle. "It does seem to only be half there," he said. "What do you think happened to the other half?" "I don't know. Lost, I suppose." "May I see it?" asked Maggie from the back seat. "I'm pretty good at solving puzzles and things." Joe handed the paper back over his shoulder to his sister. Unlike Joe, her forehead did not wrinkle up when she read it. Instead, her eyes darted back and forth across the paper, seemingly searching for something in the code, which took the form of a sentence, or rather, an incomplete sentence. It read, "When danger lurks and your heart is racing." "Well," said Maggie, "it seems that this is the first line of a piece of advice on what to do when danger lurks. To figure out the rest, all we have to do is complete the sentence." "Very interesting," said Mr. Cheeseman. "I think you may be onto something. Why don't you read the first part again, and we'll all take a crack at completing the sentence." "I'll go first," said Joe, eager to show that he was every bit as smart as his younger sister. "Me second," said Gerard, loudly working the bubble gum. "Me third," said Steve. "Grrr," said Pinky to the one-eyed sock puppet. Maggie cleared her throat. Not because it needed clearing, mind you, but because she wanted to make sure she had everyone's undivided attention in the car. "When danger lurks and your heart is racing," she read. Joe thought for a moment before blurting out, "Run!" "Run?" said Maggie. "Seriously? Does that sound like the kind of advice Mom would have given us? In the face of danger, we should run?" "Well, isn't that what we're doing?" "Well, yeah," said Maggie. "I guess that's true." "Still," said Mr. Cheeseman, "it's too short. The complete code should contain at least 50 figures. "How about run and hide?" Gerard offered. "Still too short," said Mr. Cheeseman. "How about run and hide in the basement?" said Steve. "Behind some boxes, under the stairs, at night, with a fake wig and dark glasses." "Well, I'll give that a try, Steve, as soon as we get to where we're going. In the meantime, keep thinking about it. Maybe one of us will figure it out." "I bet it'll be me," said Gerard. "I only have one question. What does lurks mean?" Gerard did not receive an answer to his question. He did not receive an answer because anyone in the car who could have answered it was looking up ahead at the strange bus parked on the side of the road next to an open field. It looked like an old school bus in all ways except the color. The school bus was black with the words, "Captain Jibby's Traveling Circus Sideshow," painted across its side in large white letters. Not in the best of shape, the bus had bald tires, and the radio antenna had been replaced with a wire coat hanger. The gas cap was also missing, and in its place was an old rag stuffed into the opening, giving the bus the look of a 4,000-pound black and white Molotov cocktail on wheels. The hood was open, and a man was standing on a wooden apple box next to the bus, leaning over the engine. He looked like a lion tamer with his head in the mouth of a large black cat with white letters across its side. "Looks like somebody's having engine trouble," said Mr. Cheeseman as he slowed the car. "But Dad," said Joe, "you're not going to stop, are you? I mean, who knows how far behind us they are?" "We must never allow our own circumstances to become an excuse for not helping others. Besides, I'm sure we could all use an opportunity to stretch our legs. You can say that again, said Steve. He doesn't even have... Doesn't matter. And furthermore, added Mr. Cheeseman, if danger lurks, I'm sure Pinky will let us know. What does lurks mean? It means that it's hiding, ready to pounce at a moment's notice, said Maggie with an intentionally creepy look on her face. In fact, it could be right behind you, and you'd never even know it. Look out! Gerard screamed and spun around to look where Maggie was pointing, but there was nothing there. Maggie laughed at her little brother. That wasn't funny, said Gerard. Dad, tell Maggie it's not funny to scare people. Please don't scare your brother, said Mr. Cheeseman, as he pulled the station wagon in behind the bus. Okay, Dad, Maggie agreed, reluctantly, for it was hard to commit to giving up something that could be so much fun. Pinky and the children climbed out of the car and followed Mr. Cheeseman to the front of the bus, where the man under the hood was grunting and mumbling a string of words that, if they had been used by a child, it would have most certainly resulted in that child having his or her mouth washed out with soap. Mr. Cheeseman cleared his throat loudly in an attempt to alert the man to their presence and perhaps put a stop to all the cursing. The man rose up quickly, smacking the back of his head on the engine's hood. Just as he was about to launch into a veritable greatest hits of swearing, he turned to see Mr. Cheeseman and the three young children. Oh, ahoy there, said the man, his thick Scottish accent. I'm so sorry, I can't do a Scottish accent, I really wish. Pushing its way through his bushy orange beard. What can I do for you fine folks? Well, actually, it appears that you could be the one who could use some help, said Mr. Cheeseman. Huh? Well, yes, that I am, said the man with a hearty laugh as he stepped off the wooden box. Even without the help of the box, the man stood more than a half-foot taller than Mr. Cheeseman. He wore a tattered blue jacket with tarnished brass buttons down the front and on the sleeves, which were stained with no small amount of engine grease. In his right hand, he appeared to be holding a Swiss Army knife with the screwdriver extended. Pausing for a second.
What's his name?
Captain Jibby, Jibby. Jibby. Pardon my manners, the large man said. My name is Jibby. As in Captain Jibby? Maggie asked. Aye, that'd be me all right. I'm Ethan, Mr. Cheeseman offered. And this is Joe, Maggie, and Gerard. Each of Mr. Cheeseman's three attractive, polite, and relatively odor-free children nodded as he or she was introduced. Steve cleared his throat loudly. Oh, yes, continued Mr. Cheeseman. This is Steve, and that's Pinky. Pinky did not smile and nod politely. She was busy sniffing Jibby's shoes. Well, I must say it's a pleasure to meet all of you, said Jibby, offering his new friends a crisp salute. As his right hand snapped to his forehead, it became apparent that he was not holding a Swiss Army knife, but rather that the knife had somehow been attached to his wrist, where one's hand might normally be. The children couldn't help but stare. Would you like me to take a look at it? Said Mr. Cheeseman, nodding toward the bus. I'm quite handy with most kinds of machines. If you don't mind. I've been messing around with it for 2 hours now with not so much as a snifter full of luck. Our dad can fix anything, Gerard said proudly. He's an inventor. Maggie gave Gerard a stern look and elbowed him in the ribs. What happened exactly? Mr. Cheeseman asked Jibby. Well, we were cruising down the road nigh about 50 knots when suddenly... Knots? Mr. Cheeseman asked. Sorry, 50 miles per hour, when suddenly she started to make a racket that would wake the dead. Then the old girl just up and quit on me. We coasted to the side of the road, and like I said, that was over 2 hours ago. The children stood in silence. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll see if I can fix it, said Mr. Cheeseman as he climbed onto the apple box and stuck his head beneath the hood. The children stood in silence for a few moments until Gerard could take it no longer. You have a Swiss Army knife for a hand? He blurted out. Again, Maggie nudged her little brother sharply in the ribs. Really? She scolded. That's rude. I'm sorry, Mr. Jibby. Please excuse my brother. He can be pretty obnoxious sometimes. First of all, Let's forget all this Mr. nonsense. The name is Jibby, plain and simple. Or Captain, if you like. Second of all, there ain't no reason to apologize for pointing out the obvious. Jibby looked at his right hand with a certain pride and admiration. With his left hand, he snapped the screwdriver back into the knife's handle. It is indeed a knife, he said, and she served me well over the years. You know, when I first lost my hand, they wanted to replace it with a hook. Can you imagine that? An ordinary, everyday hook. So I got to thinking, why not replace it with something more useful? Now, the first thing that I came to mind was a can opener. That's a handy item to have. Joe and Maggie smirked. What's so funny? You said can opener would be a handy item to have, said Maggie. Yeah, what's so funny about that? Maggie and Joe looked at each other, not sure if Jibby was pulling their legs. Well, you see, Jibby, Joe started. Well, it's just that, you lost your hand. And then you said a can opener would be... Joe decided mid-sentence not to continue, based on the look of utter confusion on Jibby's bristly face. Never mind. Please, continue your story. Yes, anyway. I then thought that perhaps a pair of scissors might be a more versatile item. I then imagined a screwdriver might be good as well. Then I thought, why not have all of the above and more? And that's how I ended up with this. How did you lose your hand? Asked Gerard, whose mouth seemed to be directly connected to Maggie's elbow at this point. Hey, Gerard protested. That, my lad, is a good question, Jibby said, kneeling on one knee in front of Gerard. Now let me ask you one. Do you know the proper way to feed a slab of meat to a tiger? No, said Gerard. Well, neither do I, Jibby said with a laugh so forceful that it seemed as though it might hurt. He punctuated the laugh by slapping his left hand on his thigh. This time it was the children's turn to be left out of the joke. Having your hand eaten by a tiger didn't seem the least bit funny to them, even if the person whose hand was eaten thought so. Was your hand really eaten by a tiger? Asked Gerard. Was indeed, said Jibby, raising back to his full 6.5 feet. Was a time that the traveling sideshow had a host of exotic animals. 2 Bengal tigers, a crocodile, a giant python, and a Tibetan yak that stood 6 feet at the shoulders. Beautiful creatures they were, and talented too. I might add, the tigers could ride unicycles. Wow, marveled Gerard. What happened to them? Maggie asked. Well, said Jibby as Mr. Cheeseman continued to fiddle away under the hood of the broken-down bus, I soon realized that a traveling sideshow is no place for a wild animal. The beasts, I'm afraid, were very unhappy. So I did what any kind-hearted person would do. I set them free. You mean you released them back into the jungle? Joe asked. Jungle? There's no jungle anywhere near here. The children looked at each other once again, not sure what to make of this latest bit of information. You mean you just let them go? Here? Well, not here, said Jibby. I believe it was Utah. Utah, said Maggie. You let 2 Bengal tigers loose in the middle of Utah? 2 Bengal tigers, a crocodile, a giant python, and a Tibetan yak, said Jibby. But now that I think about it, could have just as easily been Vermont. Anyway, now the little traveling show is made up of only people. Strange people, yes, but people nonetheless. We're on our way to Hollywood, to try to break into the movies. How about you folks? Where are you headed? Anywhere but Utah or Vermont,